when I was preparing for what I wanted to say, I came across this picture, which is just so striking. This is a young man called Joseph Philadelphia. And what happens is that part of the routine that they operate at the White House is that they invite members of the public in to meet the president. So Joseph was there with his brother and his parents, and the two boys had the opportunity to ask a question each of the president. So Joe's question was, is your hair the same as mine? So Obama said, well, why don't you find out? Touch it. And I think he was a little bit put back by that, so he gave him a bit of encouragement. So as you can see, he eventually touched his hair. And Joe said after touching his hair, yeah, it is the same as mine. Now, the significance of that photograph is that they'll have photographs all over the White House, and what they tend to do is change them every couple of weeks, because you can imagine the number of visitors they've got going through. That photograph has stayed in the White House for 3 years. And I think as a measure, you can see that it's a very kind of powerful and touching image. And in the most recent campaign, Michelle was out on the campaign trail, and here's what she had to say about that photograph, because clearly she was after the opportunity for re-election. And the point that she made is that if you ever wonder whether change is possible, I want you to think of that little black boy in the Oval Office of the White House touching the head of the first black president. Can you imagine? That's a memory that is going to stay with him for his whole lifetime. And what impact might that have on what he thinks is possible in his life? And it just seems to me that there is something from that image and that message that we need to take and to hold on to in Haringey as we face some of the challenges that are coming up. Because make no mistake, challenges there are. And, you know, it's not necessarily going to be straightforward. And this is where we turn to what some of you maybe been waiting for, this idea of VUCA. Now, I got this from a friend of mine who goes around and talks to people like yourselves all over the world about how they can improve their businesses. And he used this as a way of trying to summarize the kind of conditions that we're living in at the moment. Now, it's a phrase that's actually been around for kind of 20 years or so, but it really just captured my imagination. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about what VUCA means, because it's an acronym, and I've gone the wrong way, so let me go back the right way. Here we go. So VUCA is short for talking about volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity as a way of describing the kind of conditions that we're living in at the moment. So if you take each one in turn, volatility, we only need to think back 15 months and what was happening on the streets for our own very recent example of volatility and how it can manifest itself in modern times. But from a different standpoint, I would say it's probably worthwhile watching what's happening in the Eurozone at the moment. Because if Greece doesn't get its act together, and that creates a domino effect, so you have Italy and Spain and France and other economies that start to destabilize the euro as a currency, trust me, that will have a direct impact on us here as well. Isn't something that we can control directly, but its effect may well have a bearing on what happens with us here. So that's just a couple of examples of volatility. I'm sure you can think of your own. Uncertainty, we all know about the climate of austerity. You know, we've got councils up and down the country talking about, as the leader of Birmingham City Council put it, the end of local government as we know it. They're having to take something like 20-25% out of their overall budget over the next 5 years. And easily, within a decade, councils could reach a position where all they can afford to do are the services that they are legally obliged to provide. Anything else that is an option that's discretionary on their part, they're going to have to think very hard about whether or not they can support. That creates a huge amount of uncertainty, not just for councils, but also for people like us who work with the councils in all sorts of different ways. By the same token, I don't know whether you called a couple of weeks ago, there was a report by a body called the Commission on Living Standards, which essentially does what it says in the tin. They were looking at, given the economic times that we're in, what are the prospects for living standards? And things could work one of two ways. If there are certain measures that government takes, like adopting the living wage, going beyond the minimum wage, maximising the employment of women, paying attention generally to ensuring that barriers to employment are removed, there is actually a prospect of us being able to maintain the kind of living standards that we have at the moment. On the other hand, if government does nothing, we could easily be going back to the living standards that we experienced in the mid-1990s. So, not inevitable by any stretch, but certainly uncertainty around in terms of the economic climate. Complexity, if you want complexity, all you need to do really is step out onto the streets in Tottenham. Because where you have diversity, you have complexity. And we, along with our partners in public services and elsewhere, face the challenge of how we improve quality of life and well-being for the community. And this, I think, of all the boroughs that I've worked in, I would say that Haringey is the borough where diversity is the most what I would call normalised. It's not that unusual to see people from different backgrounds. Like Obama said last week, this is a place where if you're black or you're white, you're man or you're woman, you're gay or you're straight, able-bodied, disabled, whoever you are, this is a place where you can find a sense of belonging and make something of yourself. And there is a long history of Haringey as a borough, and Tottenham specifically, being a place where people come and do exactly that. We're in a time where that complexity is right in front of us, and the challenges that it presents in relation to how we reach people, improve their quality of lives, improve their well-being, are perhaps more complex than ever before. And as people working in the sector, in many ways, we're at the forefront of that challenge. So that also shapes a part of how we operate today. And ambiguity really is about, given that mix of factors, what do we do? Which way do we go? Do we go this way or that way? If you take a concept like the big society that's been around for a couple of years, sounds great in principle, but there's always been, I think, a bit of a struggle to try and make clear what it means in practice, to the point now where it does seem as though it's been kind of moved to the sideline to some extent. Insofar as there was an idea there, I think there are things that we in the sector will be well familiar with. But it's how we take it forward, how we engage people in civil society. No straightforward answers there. So just an illustration, just a way of talking about some of the big picture conditions that we are living with in the sector. So if VUCA is a way of describing the challenges that we face, I think VUCA is also a way of describing how we might respond to it. I'm going to get used to this technology in a minute. Here we go. Right, so back to VUCA. So here's another way of looking at VUCA, because if I take on the responsibility of leading this organization called HAVCO, and by extension, HAVCO plays a leadership role within the sector, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about if we're going to be effective in discharging that leadership role? Well, VUCA provides some of the challenge, and I think VUCA provides some of the answer as well. So from volatility, what we need is vision. And as I've suggested in the picture there, we need two kinds of vision. We need a telescope so that we can see into the future, try and anticipate some of the things that are going to be happening that we need to respond to. But we also need a microscope, so we can understand the detail that we're having to grapple with in the here and now. Now, if you've ever tried to look through a telescope and a microscope at the same time, not straightforward. But I think, particularly as a body that is supporting the sector as a whole, that is a challenge that we face. Out of uncertainty, what we need is understanding. And I think the critical thing about understanding is just captured in the graphic that I've got up there. If there is a position that we don't understand, what we have to do is to listen. And through listening, we allow others to reveal the reality as they see it. And on that basis, we can then find ways of responding. Rather than presuming that we always know best, or because we knew what things were like in the past, therefore we are going to know what things are like in the future. That may be the case in some respects, in others it may not be. What we need is understanding, and that understanding comes about primarily through listening. Out of complexity, what we need is clarity. And clarity, in essence, is about making the complex simple, making it crystal clear, as the diamond suggests. And the great thing about clarity is that if you can articulate clarity, people will follow you. The risk is that you can also be very clear and very wrong. And the risk then is that you start to lead people in a direction that's not helpful. So I think it is our role to start to bring that clarity, try to interpret some of the changes that are happening, whether it's in society or in policy, and make them simple for our colleagues such as yourselves to respond to. And then out of ambiguity, what we require is agility. We need to be able to move quickly to respond to changes. That will mean a certain amount, I think, of trial and error. There are certain things that we think this is a solution that might work. We'll try it out. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't work, we need to realize that quickly, stop doing that, and try something else. That's a very different way of working from coming up with a 5-year plan and plodding year by year through that plan. That sort of approach, by and large, is going to be less effective in future years. What we need is a much more agile approach to planning who we are and what it is we do as an organisation.